You are watching Wide Field with Vivian Birchall. This is Wide Field.
Welcome to Wide Field. I'm Vivian Kobusingye Birchall, your host, and with me today at the studio is Mr. Lamine Savadogo, an expert in the energy sector. Welcome, Lamine.
Thank you very much.
For the sake of our viewers who haven't met Lamine before or haven't watched an interview with him, he's going to introduce himself and tell us what he does in the energy sector. He was my last guest before the pandemic, and now he's my first in-studio guest after the reopening. Welcome again, Mr. Lamine. Tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you very much for welcoming back to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to me, the topic of energy, and more specifically electric energy. I am the president of Marison Energy Systems, which is a company based here in the Boston area. For the last 32 years, we have specialized in developing business relationships between the United States and Africa exclusively. And now most of that work is focused on developing relationships, again, in the business sense between the United States and Africa in the area of electric energy production, transmission, and distribution.
Well, a lot has changed since I last hosted you at the studio. There's been a pandemic, there's been a new administration. So in what ways has the energy sector changed with these new changes?
Okay. Great that you mentioned the pandemic first, which I think is a once-in-a-lifetime event which has had a lot of impact in how people perceive the electric energy sector. Right. We have had to work very hard behind the scenes in the electric power sector. By the way, I forgot to mention also that I am a global ambassador for the Edison Electric Institute for Africa. The Edison Electric Institute is the association of all the investor-owned electric utilities in the United States. 90% of our electricity is produced by private companies. Mm-hmm. We provide electricity to about 229 million people in the United States.
That's a lot.
And EI are also international members. So my task is try to see how we could forge better relationships between the electric utilities here and the electric utilities in Africa.
And how long have you been an ambassador?
About 4 years now.
Okay.
So anyway, so the pandemic demonstrated that if need be, it needed to be proved that the electricity is such an integral part of our lives today that very few things will be possible without it. Mm-hmm. People stayed home in the comfort of their own homes with electricity provided for them to cook, to watch TV, to do Zoom calls, which are dependent on data banks strewn around the country, and those data banks are voracious consumers of electricity. So the men and women of the electric power industry here in the US and across the world work together behind the scene. We have lots of Zoom calls to try to learn from each other or how to handle this. The fact that people are staying at home now rather than going to work about 9 o'clock, and so the power demand at home drops at that time, and when they come back at night it changes. So we had to adjust the load curve, and so that was really very, very important factor, the pandemic. The second fact you mentioned is the change in administration in Washington as of January 20th, 2021. And that change meant a change in America's policy from a focus on energy to a focus on climate. And so that focus on climate, which I'm very proud to say is led by one of our own, former Senator John Kerry, who is from Massachusetts. The president appointed him as the climate czar to lead, to rejoin the world, to try to make some sense of this situation that is facing all of us now, this global climate change. It doesn't stop at the border. It's a global phenomenon. What happens elsewhere affects us over here. So that would be a momentous thing that the U.S. rejoined the Paris Club. We could talk about that a little bit more, better. The other factor is that we have seen disasters, many of them, droughts and floods in places like Germany, in China, over here, the droughts in California, which create fires, and the fires threaten transmission lines and people's way of life. So that's been also a very important factor that we should note. Now, it's very visible to everybody. Another factor that I would mention is the increased incidence of cyber attacks on energy infrastructure.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so that's been, I mean, we remember the pipeline incident, which was controlled in time, but there are actors, there are many places in the world, some of them state actors, trying to disrupt the energy supply system, just not electricity, but everything else. And we have to be ever vigilant to make sure that they don't succeed, because if they do, it's going to, the nation will come to a stop completely if they are able to disable our energy sector. But the people at home should be rest assured that electric energy sector, all the power companies are working very hard along with the federal government and the Homeland Security to make sure that the grid remains resilient and secure.
It's, I was going to dig a little deeper into the security of our infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, but since you mentioned the pipeline, for the sake of those who may have missed, can you just tell us very briefly what happened, what that threat looked like? And, you know, these are things we take for granted as consumers, but then there is a big army trying to protect us from such threats.
Okay, we've all heard of ransomware, where some hacker gets into your system and control all your data and doesn't give you control back until you pay a ransom. So if there was one such case where a pipeline operator's system was hacked and the criminals decided to ask for a ransom to be paid before they could unlock the system. And so when it happened, there was some damage, but the company was able to work very, very quickly with FBI and to be able to stop the thing. Now, was ransom paid or not? How much? I'm not sure. But for a while, it created a panic in the area where the pipeline was sending fuel. And people were standing in line to buy fuel because they thought that there was going to be a shortage. But luckily, this was controlled very quickly. Now, those types of attacks, people everywhere, in many places, some say in Russia, in China, in Iran, are working 24 hours a day to be able to try to disrupt the energy system. And that's why we all have to be vigilant to be able to make sure that they don't succeed.
I remember that panic incident where people were trying to stock up on fuel or fill up their cars. But then just for the sake of our viewers, what region was affected or would have been affected by such an attack? Well,
it was the service territory of that pipeline company. I think of places in New Jersey and around the eastern seaboard. I don't know specifically their territory, but that's where what would have been affected. But if it is, then if people in New Jersey think that they don't have enough power, gas, then you will see people driving to the neighboring states to try to get something. And before long, it will spread around the nation. Right. So that's why it, even if it's localized, it has an impact. And we have to remember we have commerce with those places. Trucks bring goods from there and to there. So if they cannot find fuel, it impacts the entire region.
And before we get into one of the main issues, which is climate change and renewable energy, I want to just give, if you would, please give a perspective of how the energy sector looks like in our country and also in our Commonwealth. You know, how is the distribution? How are we interconnected, if at all? Just to get a bit of an overview.
Okay. It's glad that you mentioned the Commonwealth.
Yes.
I'd like to say that back in March, I believe March 6th, Governor Baker signed a climate legislation in Massachusetts, which finally brought everybody together, both the public, the governor, and the Massachusetts state legislators together to finally come to an agreement so that we have a pathway to our goals for clean climate in our state. Our state is unusual in the sense that of all the states in the country, we are our economy, how do I say that? Our GDP in Massachusetts is about $580 billion. It was in 2020. So the portion of that depends on electricity that is energy intensive is very low. We in New York are the top two using less energy to generate our GDP. And because of the type of economy we have, less manufacturing, services, financial, hospitals, and things like that. So we use less energy to generate our GDP than other parts of the country. We don't have any energy resources. We don't have coal, we don't have natural gas, so everything is imported from somewhere. Our natural gas is important. When we used to use coal, it came from somewhere. We have a little bit of hydropower along the Connecticut River Valley, but most of our hydropower comes from Canada, specifically from Hydro-Quebec. So we have several companies, Eversource, National Grid, that distribute electricity. We have also some municipal utilities in the state that distribute to the area. So basically, we are less affected than others with this issue of climate change induced by power production from coal. We don't even have any nuclear power plant anymore. So everything is either natural gas or renewable energy of some sort, and a little bit of petroleum-based fueled power plants that are used as a backup system. Now, that doesn't mean that all the electricity we use is necessarily from clean energy sources, because we import from somewhere, and we can say a lot of bad things about coal power plants, but we are not entirely ready to get rid of them yet. This is as a nation. They come in handy when you have system breaks down, that what happened in Texas, for instance. When you have those kinds of things, they can play their role very, very well. So we're going to gradually mothball a lot of those coal power plants, but they will always be in the background, just in case we need them. We're not going to be using them as much as we used to in the past.
Well, this is a good moment for me to kind of transition into climate change, clean energy, and what that means. When we say, we've seen the communities across the Commonwealth really advocating for clean energy in their buildings, in motor vehicles, and basically trying to be a clean state, just to summarize it. So, but for this to happen, there must be a supply of the clean energy. In your experience, what does that look like, and how realistic are our clean energy goals if we look at the entire picture on where the resources are coming from, what those resources are, where they're produced, and how we have to, how they are acquired in the United States? I'm trying not to, overstep and get into what you want to tell us, but for our viewers, give us a holistic picture. if you can.
It's a politically charged question, but since I'm not a politician, I'm going to give my opinion.
Correct.
As somebody who observes the sector. There are resources that are going to be enablers of the clean energy as we envision it. There are some people and some states where they are so much more aggressive in their goals, you know, and some of those states have the required resources to do it. California has a lot of sun, okay? They also have a lot of space. It's a big, wealthy economy. So they can set some aggressive goals that a state like us, who are in Massachusetts, where our sun resources are not as much. Remember that in winter, the sun sometimes sets about 4:30, okay? So it doesn't rise until late. So we cannot have the same goals as California, numerically. California, I think by 2025, they require that, if I'm correct, that no new car will be licensed on California roads if it's not electric, okay? Now, can we do that here? I don't know. But anyway, to enable what we need, which is solar energy, wind energy, electric cars, okay, the electrification of transportation, which means that for us in Massachusetts, about half of our homes are heated with natural gas. So we will stop using natural gas and heat our homes with electricity, okay? So to enable all of that, we need to create the solar panels, manufacture the solar panels, manufacture the electric cars. For that, you need some materials such as manganese, such as coal, such as cobalt, such as lithium, and many others.
Yes.
Now, if you check for many of those resources, we don't have them here in the United States. They are strong around the world, in Africa, in Australia, in China, in South America, in many places. So let me differentiate between resources and reserves.
Yes.
So the resources may be in some parts of the world. For geopolitical, geographic regions and all of that, it may not be possible to access those resources. Mm-hmm. Okay, where the resources have been proven and determined, and there is the infrastructure to exploit, to extract them, that's what we're going to focus on. So once you extract them, we have to process them. Mm-hmm. You extract the ore from the ground, and you have to process them. So if you look at the International Energy Agency put together a nice infographic, which I hope will be shown to the viewers.
That was startling.
Okay. So that shows that, for instance, if you look at all the resources, the copper, the lithium, the cobalt, the rare earth elements that we're talking about, for the processing, most of that is happening in China now.
Yeah.
The Chinese Communist Party, in its vision, when we were fighting other things here, decided to go around the world to sign contracts with countries such as the Democratic Republic of
Congo, yes,
to have a control on their supply. So they extract, for instance, the cobalt and take it to China and process it. So if you need to buy cobalt for your car manufacturing, the cell phones and all of that, you have to buy it from China.
And of course, that's not forgetting that Congo has about 70% of the world's supply.
Exactly.
And China has control over that.
Yeah, that's control on one of that. Not only that, but also the processing of the material as we can use it. Okay? So now that we are sort of in a declared war with them, of course they are going to use that. Yeah, so you're referring back to I think it was in the 1980s or something like that, the rare earth elements, which are extremely important, which China possessed a lot of. The US still had some. China decided to drop its prices. And it drove out all the US suppliers. So we don't produce any of those rare earth elements right now. They do. So we will need to go to them to source any of these materials. And we have to remember also processing them is very energy intensive. Outside of hydropower, I am not sure that you could process those minerals with solar power, okay? So that is one issue that we are, so to get to be, to have a clean energy, we have to pollute even more to be able to process those materials. And if you see that China has been able to control it, is because they don't have the issues that we have here, because the government sets the policy. It has to work with the private sector and the public. And there is an infight about everybody wanting to do it from their perspective. In China, if the Communist Party decides something, they will do it. If they want to build a dam and you have to move 500,000 people, they can do that. You cannot do that here.
And just for the record, we are not endorsing the system, the Communist Party system.
No.
We're just making comparisons.
Yeah, I'm just explaining
factors
what is happening there.
Yeah.
So that's, any time you try to do something, you have a lot of constituencies, everybody tries to defend. That's a democracy.
Yeah.
Now, in places where you don't have that, you can do something. So even if we wanted to bring back some of those processing here, I don't think that most people would not want those plants in their backyard or in their state.
Which is interesting. So we don't want the plants in our country, but we want the products from those plants, because we want to have a clean climate in our country.
Yes.
So we are at the mercy of China. This is what I'm hearing. That's
precisely it. And it's not just us here in the US.
Basically.
It's the world, because solar panels, from the last statistics I read about, 85% is produced either in China or by Chinese-controlled companies in Southeast Asia. Okay? So that gives you a certain sense. And they have a very big electric vehicle manufacturing sector that they are really, really working very hard to be able to promote. For now, Tesla is the leader. Okay, Tesla is the leader, but there are many other companies. I'm sure you remember the Ford electric pickup truck that President Biden promoted about 6, 7 weeks ago, which is supposed to be a big success, because the SUVs are one big segment of the vehicle market. I understand that Ford has registered about 70,000 orders for those trucks, which are supposed to be really, really amazing. So if we can convince those people, the people who like SUVs, to buy electric vehicles, then the future of the industry is really bright. But the question becomes then, how do we make it so that a lot of that manufacturing happens here, so that we can create the high quality jobs that pay well, decent salaries, and provide a future for people here in the United States.
And also, as a country, America has been known to be, or the United States has been known to be the lead in many things. So, and I feel right now, as you speak, that we are not the lead in the processing and production of what we need for a clean environment. But so, and if I'm wrong, please elaborate.
I've been in this country for more than 40 years. I know when Americans put their mind to something,
right,
they can do it. It's a can-do nation.
Yes.
So for that, I remain optimistic. But we should not hide the fact that the Chinese are way ahead. When we, in our political system, we were doing some infighting, instead of focusing on our common goals, they went around the world and mapped things and tried to lock us out. Okay, that's what happened. But we can work up and do different things. I remember when the country sort of thought about energy independence from the Middle East, hydraulic fracking technology came about.
Right.
So the U.S. became self-sufficient in oil production. So when President Kennedy decided to put people on the moon, it happened.
It happened.
Okay. So I still think that that determination, that resilience, the resources, the excellent laboratories and research institutions that we have here,
MIT.
And others can enable this kind of thing to happen. And as we speak, some of those resources that I talked about earlier, people are also working on alternatives.
Yes.
You know, and Tesla is thinking, boy, we don't want cobalt mined by children and in areas where people are losing their lives. Let's think about something, a different alternative. And I think that as those processes go on, as we speak, labs around the world in the developed countries are trying to come up with something. It's going to be very difficult, but if we put our minds together and decide to fund it, because that's where the government comes in funding research and development, and then work with the private sector to achieve those goals.
Right. Before I forget, there is one thing you talked about, you know, the children, the process for getting the minerals and the resources for clean energy. You know, the mining in Congo really affects the communities. The mining of lithium affects communities because of what is required for that lithium to be mined. So, and there has been a conversation about smart mining, you know. So what can you tell our viewers about the cost for clean energy for communities where the resources come from?
Well, in Chile, I think they call the tri-country area, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, where they have a lot of lithium, and they are in what they call salt flats, which are a little bit less destructive to extract than area where you have to actually dig, you know, just drill down the earth. And in that process, you have to drill down, inject water. So it is said, you know, I have not seen a lithium mine. It is said that it can affect the water quality, the water tables in the areas where they are, even if you try to reprocess and clean the water before you inject it. But it's going to have an environmental impact on what happens there. So you have the native people in Chile, in Argentina, who live around that desert where the salt flats are, have been protesting that it's affecting the quality of their lives. We know about the DRC. If you see the mines, the cobalt mines, the gold mines, the diamond mines, how the people work and under really, really very difficult conditions with unsafe materials such as mercury. I was talking to somebody yesterday who told me that his cousin was infected with mercury and he died. This was in Africa.
So sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So, and people don't know.
No.
They hear that there is X item in this area, you can extract it and make a lot of money, and they go and they dig and they do kinds of things. They get hurt in the process. Governments not being able to control or train people. I like to say, if you love the earth, if you see a mining operation, you're going to have second thoughts with the violence we have to do to the earth to extract its materials. But they were placed there for us. We have been able to mine them for many centuries. It's just a question of how do we do it in a sustainable way.
Right, and you know, that's where as an immigrant from Africa, or even from the rest of the world that's not the United States, sometimes, you know, I personally struggle with that whole concept of wanting renewable energy, but also knowing that a country like Congo, which is our neighbor, there's been a lot of inhumane ways of extracting those minerals. So I don't know whether there is a way that legislators, but again, we don't do the mining, but maybe legislators can push companies, if they are U.S. companies that do the mining there, to kind of do it ask them to do it in humane ways just for the sake of those communities because they're human. And we know that climate change, energy, all these are global issues. So even if we're fighting for it, and even from this conversation, we recognize that we want an increased number of clean cars or electric cars. But what it takes to produce those cars is going to probably affect another country in possibly negative ways in some ways. So how do we act very responsibly as rich nations to be able to achieve our goals, but also maintaining the dignity of the people in communities that are enhancing or are there is a word that you use that I liked, and it's completely off, but communities that are providing these resources for us to enjoy.
Okay, mining was done here in this country. Mining is being done in Australia. It's being done in many places where it's being done more safely.
Okay.
And the reason is why is all an issue of governance. When you have a state that is capable to think ahead, that is capable to have laws and legislation that is capable to enforce them. Okay? So that's what needed. If you look at Congo, it's a huge country. And most of it is not even connected with roads. So if you are sitting in Kinshasa trying to control what is going on in another part of the country where the mining is happening, it's very difficult when you are a weak state. Okay? So the first thing is really to work with those governments so that they are strong, that they are able to understand the things. And I think this is one of the things that the United States is doing behind the scenes that most people are not aware of. And the U.S. Agency of International, the AID, the Agency for International Development, other sectors, even the State Department, the Department of Energy has collaboration with countries around the world to practice safe, techniques in certain areas. So it happens behind the scene. Nobody, if you're not involved in the sector, we don't know. But there are other countries that do not care about those standards because they don't care about those standards in their own country. So they are only interested in extracting, and they extract, they don't care, and they leave. Okay? So this is where the world, there is an organization, something I forgot the name, Extractive Industries in Africa, which is also trying to make some sense on how the extractive, that there is some transparency, because that's really, really important. Because sometimes some countries, you would give them a contract to build a road. As they build the road, they mine all the lumber that is there, take it back to their country.
Oh dear.
They also explore resources. If they find gold, they take it, because the government doesn't know how to control. Even if you have mining, you give a concession to a country. Most of our countries in Africa do not have the expertise and the capacity to control what is being taken out, how much and when.
Why is that?
Again, governance. You can corrupt people who are supposed to do those checking and control. A lot of other things. And the fact that also if the company that is coming in doesn't have good ethical value. Yeah. Because some of the big mining companies that are publicly owned companies are beholden to their stock, the shareholders. The shareholders put pressure on them. You have civil society. You have an educated population that is able to call them on what they are doing. Okay, so a lot of corporations are afraid of that. You may recall the issue of Blood Diamond in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah, and the sweatshirts shops in Bangladesh and places like that. A lot of that comes as a reaction of people here who have access to information, who can process that information, who ask, where does this dress that I'm wearing come from? Who made it? and how much are they getting paid for, so that they work together with the people back in the country to make sure that people who work under good conditions, safe conditions, and also make decent living.
And which brings, let's get back to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Going forward, what does clean energy look like in the next, or what would it look like in the next 15, 20 years?
Okay.
And how do we get there?
Okay, how do we get there? So, first of all, talking to our viewers who are consumers of energy have a role to play. So, the message that I would like to take them to them is that everybody should try to make sure that in their home, the energy they consume, that the system is efficient, that you don't waste energy. So, Mass Save as a program where you can have an audit done of your house, to make sure that it's properly insulated, that the appliances that you have are energy efficient. And if we all do that, remember we get more than half of our home eating things from natural gas. So if we all do that already, it's going to be conservation. That's one. Two, the electric utility companies have also their role to play in how they produce the electricity, upgrading some of the infrastructure, which is extremely important, so that the energy is more efficiently transmitted to people, that we can account for it, that they have technologies that allow them to do what they call demand response, so that if it's very hot on a specific day, that the air conditioning requirement is, too big for the system, that there are some people that you can call and say, by the way, could you shut down your operation for a couple of hours to allow us to balance the system? So that is the electric utilities' responsibility, to make sure that they have the systems and technologies in place to do that, and also for companies and to be able to respond when they are requested. We have solar, roof solar top on our homes. We have different things, so we have to do that. But it's not going to be easy, being a state that has that doesn't have its own energy resources. So we have to depend on people. That natural gas that I'm talking about, a lot of it is imported some of it is imported by pipeline, but most of it comes in LNG tankers from the Caribbean, I believe Barbados. Those are the huge tankers that come into a terminal in Everett, and when they come, because they are so sensitive, you have to close down the entire harbor to let them come, very slowly, and make sure that you protect them against anybody who may have bad intentions, to make sure that the ship docks properly, unloads its cargo, and leaves. So all of that is to say that our task is not going to be easy, but if we are determined, and if we work together, and we don't deny that global warming is happening, then I think we are on our way to something already, that the legislature has signed this legislation and Governor Baker signed it. I think we are on the right track.
Are there any local legislation gaps that you think could enhance this goal or be a catalyst for this goal?
Yeah, it depends on who you talk to.
In your opinion. Yeah. I'm talking to you right now.
Well, we were in negotiation with, meaning the state of Massachusetts, with Quebec to get more hydropower, which is as clean as it gets. And they have plenty of it there. In order to bring that in, you have to reinforce or build new transmission lines. Okay, so as I said, nobody wants those lines to go through the area. So, and some people do calculate, some people have hidden agenda, okay? And they will actually mislead the public by taking certain things and blow them out of proportion.
Such as?
Yeah, well, they say the building of that infrastructure to bring in more hydropower is actually the process of doing that is going to generate more green gas emission. And also that the people in Quebec, they may have to build new power plants, and in the process of building new big hydro, they are also contributing to global warming. So it's...
Which is what's happening with the mining, and because it requires a lot of energy to mine. It's a lot of energy to produce the batteries that are great for clean energy. So
it depends on what you want to focus on and what your specific agenda is. But I think if we look at this, we all live on Earth. We have one Earth, okay? And we are destroying it slowly. We want to be sure that when we are gone, we're going to be gone when some of these things are here. Our children, our children's children are the ones who are going to inherit something that is going to be extremely difficult for them to lead the lives that we have. I mean, look at Massachusetts here. We have clean, green around. It's just our air is clean. Our water we can drink. You know, our water is even the Quabbin Reservoir provide great water. You know, our water is, I guess, among the top in the country in terms of its quality. And I can tell you, when I go to some states and I drink tap water, I say, our tap water is so good. It's just because we are doing it in a safe environment, in an environment where there are good regulations, there are rules that are applied, and they are monitored properly.
Massachusetts is doing a great job, but there's more that can be done, obviously. Especially if we are depending on energy from outside of the state. Then what happens if climate change affects those other areas, our suppliers? If we're looking at Quebec, the hydroelectricity, if their water dries up for some reason and they have to ration it and prioritize their people, what happens to Massachusetts? So
that is a thing. We learned that during the pandemic. Some of the things that we depended on other countries to supply us, even something as basic as maps and PPEs. So, and it happened before. There was a big freeze, I think, a few years ago, where the transmission lines were frozen in Quebec because of icing. You know, so those things. Supply chain security is a whole area which applies to everything from the food that we eat, the clothes that we wear, the cars that we drive. We have a shortage of sort of chips right now. Okay.
Chips?
Yeah. For microchips for the computers.
Really?
Yes, because it has slowed down the production of many things. You know that you heard that used car prices have gone up. That's because the companies that are manufacturing the cars, which are with a lot of microchips in them, there is a shortage of microchips on the market, so they cannot put out cars as fast as they can. So supply chain. That's what COVID told us. Oh my God, we depend on other parts of the world. You may recall that you had to go to your store, you couldn't take more than X number of toilet papers and things that basic.
Yeah.
That's all supply chain related issues. And that's why we all have to work together. I mean, globally, now that we have put manufacturing facilities all over the world, supply chain becomes a huge and very important concern.
And yeah, I'm just looking at the supply chain specifically in the energy sector as we drive toward clean energy, what that is going to look like, given all that we've talked about, China doing most of the production for what we need for electric cars. Because the reason I ask, many of the towns have come up with climate action plans, and many of the plans include transitioning infrastructure into clean infrastructure, whether it's buildings, new buildings, electric cars. Probably some municipalities are going to be advocating for clean electric cars. So, and what that would look like, given that our supply chain is dependent on external factors?
Well, this is one area where one has to rely on the market system, so that if there is enough incentive, more people will get involved.
Okay.
And that means, of course, that both the private sector and the government and the consumers all work together. You know, I know sometimes it can be adversarial,
Right.
but if we all decided to work together, we should be able to come to some solution where things are plentiful and supply. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we cannot always continue to consume the way we have been. I mean, it just that, you know, sometimes I get ashamed that in my house I have, 4 TVs? I mean, why do I need that? You know?
Consumerism.
Yeah, just,
we are all guilty of somewhere or another.
You're just being lazy, not going from one floor to the other. So we all have to be able to make some sense of what is reasonable, what we are going to ask of the earth, because ultimately everything is coming from the earth.
Yeah.
And although Mother Nature has been very generous with us, you know, that we are supposed to be good stewards and leave it, if not as good as when we found it, but you know,
It can't be better because we've abused it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
We're cutting down the rainforests in
exactly
the Amazon.
Yeah.
So.
Which brings me to another point, that in Africa, the Congo River Basin, as you know, is the second lung of the world. The area captures a lot of the carbon produced. And so the Amazon was the first one, which is going, and we have to make sure the Congo River Basin is preserved. And right now, the things that are going on there in terms of logging and cutting down the trees, it just has to stop. That's why we have to engage with the countries that surround the Congo River Basin and make sure.
And what are those countries for the purpose of our viewers?
I'm sorry?
What are those countries?
You have a Democratic Republic of Congo, you have a Republic of Congo, there are 14 different countries.
Okay.
So that whole area has to be preserved, first for the people who live there, and secondly for the rest of us, because we all depend on it.
Okay.
Okay?
That is very, very interesting information, because I don't think we in the United States, in Massachusetts, have thought about how we are dependent on a country or on a region to, absorb the carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
And so this is very important for our viewers to learn, to understand, and to research about. So even as we stay in our cocoon here in Massachusetts, we really do depend on the world in order for our clean energy goals. And with that, I would like to thank you, Lamine, for taking your time to sit with me yet again for another interesting, another great interview about the energy sector. And is there any final word for our viewers before I say?
Well, the final word is to, of course, thank you for inviting me into a studio and having this spirited debate. But the final message is that the climate control is a global issue. You know, what we do here affects other people, and what others do affects us. So we all have to start thinking in those terms, that we should agree that we see things around us that are telling us that things are not normal. You know, we saw 200 and something people killed in Germany. We saw that heat dome in Canada for all places, where temperatures shot more than 100 degrees. So something is happening, okay? And we all have a responsibility to make sure that it happens, that what we do here, I know in many of our towns, you cannot cut a tree without going through a hearing, okay?
What town is that?
Yeah, in Arlington, in other places.
Oh, you mean
many places you cannot cut a tree just like that. All right? You have to justify why you're doing it. So other places in the world where some people are doing this without thinking of the consequences. 2 years ago, there was a scandalous export of rare wood species from the Republic of Gabon. It's illegal, completely illegal. But with this, apparently a Chinese company working with some corrupt officials in the country, were able to cut down this tree and export it. Once you cut it down, it takes years to grow. You know, so everyone, we have to work together. I think people should do home audits from MassSave. It's free, to make sure that your home is efficiently heated during the winter time. And let's make sure that when we leave the rooms, we shut down the lights and things like that. It's all for the planet. And it's also good for our pockets.
Right. Again, excellent interview. Next time, I want to bring you back to talk about just housing in particular. But for now, thank you so much again for your time. And to our viewers, thank you for watching Wildfield. Till next time.